cat's always trying to eat something. I never thought animals actually ate homework until this cat. Where is the transcript? Stop transcript. There we go. Okay, and then I'm going to share my screen. What are you doing back here? Digging into this goat skull that I found, but there's something else back there. Hey, no. Right? No. That's my art. All right, yeah, sharing my screen. Did I share it? Okay, and then here we got in the chat. Yo, you aren't gonna get out of there. You're not allowed in there anymore if you're knocking over bones. Get out of here. Come on. Okay. Sorry, Nebula is getting in trouble. She's fine now. She's banished to the pillar of disappointment. Okay, let's talk about Margot's car. That's looking really cool. So, share my screen, and here we are. All right, very cool, Margot. I can see you've got like the full flowing body, the overall silhouette mapped out, and quite a lot of detail in the frame so far, and that's fantastic. It looks like you've even got like some roll bars on the inside when you're creating the cage of it all. So yeah, now the next stage is to kind of define where the major elements of shape change. Like the bumper is very much it's got like a very specific kind of shape around it. You know, like the panel line of where the bumper sits is something to start defining. The you know, where the headlights are is probably going to need to be built into the model there, and then eventually we'll get to the doors. There's always like ridges around the windows and ridges around the well, yeah, mostly just the windows, but we'll have the panel lines around the doors. We'll have the panels in between the bumpers, and these are all just basically extra edge flow elements that would go around these areas. I'll talk about that from the perspective of Photoshop, but we could also talk about. I mean, the one thing I want to point out is the flow, the cleanliness. It's awesome. It's a great start. It's exactly what you need for a car, and it looks like things are going to move pretty smoothly from here on out. So good job, Margot. Really happy to see this progress. Is there anything in the poly flow that you're having any issues with? It looks like it's coming together pretty clean. Now it's just about getting in and getting some more detail in there.
So far, I don't really have any questions, so I'm just gonna keep working.
Keep working on it. Awesome, cool. Yeah, yeah. I don't have too much to comment other than, you know, the areas that I think you already understand, which is creating the systems around the bumper, systems around the you know, the bottom frame. There's usually some sort of extra ridge down here on the very lower part, but you know all this. You'll use the reference to just keep going, keep working on the details. I'm really happy with the overall shape. It does look like the Nissan, and it really is. It's matching all of the forms, so I'm really excited about it. Awesome. Wheels are a fun one in that there's a couple of ways that we can create wheels. One is in Maya, that's pretty simple, and then another one would be in ZBrush that is. It's simple, but it's using a cool tool that's worth checking out. So just to show these tools, just as far as like how we've made wheels I've made wheels in the past, I want to show just a couple of cool tricks for creating the tread of wheels, because You can map it on with texture, and that's awesome. But if you do make a 3D wheel, you can bake that normal map down and get the lighting to react to it really nicely. And generally, it's baked to a texture, but it usually starts out being um, a high-res model, just if you want to get the lighting right. Let's see. Be easier with a pipe rather than a tube. Tube is a little too, well, it might work. The pipe, if you in mind when you're creating stuff, you've got um, the torus or the pipe. The pipe is more hard edge, and I think you can still add. Yeah, you can still add quite a bit of uh, um, uh, spans, and then use this to kind of create something. So I'm going to start with the pipe because the hard edge is helpful. Make the axis a bit higher in subdivisions. Let's see. This is a little trick. If anybody doesn't know, if you click the text next to a number in Maya, you can then use the middle mouse button and scroll back and forth to crank up that or down that text. So I want to crank up the number of 20 to a higher number, and it just up that way. Crank this down, and then I'll add some more in a minute. But what I want to do is just kind of get the general feel of where a tire would be. Usually is going to kind of expand a little bit because of pressure, but there is kind of almost a crispness to this edge, just the way that tires are built. They're very squared off. So I maybe start like this, and if we smooth it, it looks much more like a tire. But what I want to do is get some tread in there. So I've got a couple of little tricks for that. So let's see. I'm going to add one more span here. And then what I love doing is a really simple tread. It's not as much for something that maybe has a very specific tread that you got to do that I'm going to show you in ZBrush. But this is a really simple tread. You just kind of move some of the spans going one direction. Other spans could either move backwards, or in this case, there's often a square tread on the outside and this tread in the middle. And how are we going to get this tread to be interesting? I'm going to extrude it, but I'm going to separate every poly, and that there's a button for that in the extrude. So I've got these three spans. I just double clicked on these three spans. I'll right click two faces to select the faces there. And then what I'll do is I'll use the toolbox. There it is. I'll say extrude, but keep faces together. I'm going to turn this off, and then that way I can make this these separated. And now each poly is doing its own thing. This only works if the poly shapes themselves are the only thing you're really extruding. But this works really well for getting a nice tread in a tire. So really quick way of making tread, kind of fun. Then when you smooth it, it does this, which is annoying because you don't want these to turn into circles. So an easy fix around that is just to add a few spans in the corners here and here and here and here. All of this would be easier if I had decided to turn symmetry on. Symmetry for the X, is that right? See, yeah, there we go. But yeah, I can do it all at once if I've got symmetry on, do both sides without even having to mirror it. And now when I smooth it, the tread is there. It's not the greatest tread because I haven't really spent a whole lot of time on each of these polys or anything, but it does make a quick tread. And you know, it's something that works. Let's look at the Nissan tread just to see what kind of tires it does have. So the 8, I had it somewhere, downloaded it, I think. Yeah, there we go. 180X, that's what it is. 180SX. I know everybody's a stickler about realism in tires, but it looks like a lot of tires will work for it. So you can see like some of this that might work out pretty well with the system that I just did because it's super simple. This one, for example, is a little more complex and would require a ZBrush pass, and or at least that's one way we could do it. So I'm going to go back to when the tire was smooth without extrusions, export that to ZBrush, and there's a really cool, quick way of using symmetry, radial symmetry, to add whatever kind of tread we want. So yeah, let's do that. Let's export this tire. Load up ZBrush. All right, and then I just go to my tools, import that tire. Okay, now I need to divide it a few times. And then I want to use dam standard. This is one way to do it. Dam standard cuts in, so I can kind of cut a tread in there. There are some other tools that work pretty well too, like slice cuts in pretty, or was it slice? Slash. That one cuts in real deep, real fast. I usually turn down the intensity so it's not quite as intense, but this can get you whatever kind of tread you want to. And what I'm going to do here is, instead of drawing the entire thing all the way around, I am just going to crank up the radial symmetry. So usually symmetry is lateral, there's two of them, but if you go under transform, you can activate radial symmetry, which this one is the wrong axis here, so I need to change the axis to like Z. Now I've got radial symmetry where I can draw 8 times around, so the tread could easily be 8 times. That's pretty easy, but why don't I step it up a little more, and you can really crank up that symmetry, like something like 32, and now we get something that we can create an immense amount of detail in the tire. And it's a really fun way of creating whatever kind of tread you want, because you can draw it in at this point. So this one, it's got diagonal lines on the side, kind of semi-diagonal lines after that, straight lines, and then these diagonal lines that are intersecting. So we could do that. We could do straight lines here. Another thing that is interesting with ZBrush is holding down Shift does give you a straight line. It left or right or whatever direction you go, it usually will straighten it. The lazy mouse pops out and it does straighten it. So up and down works really well in this situation. This is actually, it's radial symmetry, but it also is lateral. So I might be able to, no, that's too much. It just goes nuts because it's trying to do radial and lateral. Okay, I'll leave it that way then. But yeah, another cool trick in ZBrush is if you do a mark that you really like and it's not quite deep enough, say real soft, but it was where you wanted it to, you can hit the button or the key 1 on your keyboard, and it repeats the last stroke that you did, or whatever you did. If you did a camera rotation, it'll just do that again. But that can be helpful if you're doing something and you just put a little bit in and you want to redo that mark 1, and it just digs it in even more, or does again whatever was the last thing that you did. So I got 2 lines there. Then we've got the other kind of mid, something like that. Yeah. Use the Shift button to get straight up and down. It's a little bit easier. And then we've got the diagonals in the center. So let's get these 2 lines. And then the diagonals we've got diagonals on the side that are kind of drifting off. Then we've got another diagonal here. It's a little less, a little more square. They offset. I feel like they are pretty in line, in fact. Then we've got these diagonals that are going to kind of intersect with each other, like this. They have a much prettier shape. They kind of seem to flow or curve a little bit, and that's something that would be a lot harder to get in Maya. I find this is a lot easier to do in ZBrush with that curvature. There you go. Okay. And then the coolest thing about this is we're not just stuck with what we just did. We can go in and clean it up. And every time we do anything, it updates every radial mark. So it's a wonderful way to get tires. It's kind of one of the easiest tricks in the CG book. And then it's got a rim and a hub and everything, but that is could be done ultimately in a similar fashion just by creating another shape in there. So I would add another cylinder. Could do it in ZBrush if it's a polymesh cylinder. You just create a primitive, doesn't work, but a polymesh primitive will work. And then we can append it to this tire. So got my subtools, pen, blender in here. I'm going to have to rotate it. Holding down shift gives you kind of a step rotation of 5 degrees, which makes it easier to hit 90. Of course, I needed to rotate the cylinder, not the tire. And then I can scale it in. I just want to keep the alignment the same. That's really important. Now what I could do is take this rim. It doesn't have the right amount of polys. The distribution's bad. When I divide that, that's going to look pretty ugly. So I think I might as well just turn it into a Dynamesh. And then at least it's got enough polys to do something with. We can go to symmetry and turn on the radial symmetry. And 32 might be too many for this because the the hubcaps usually only have like 4 symmetry or 6 symmetry. This one looks like 5. That one looks like 10. So yeah, it wouldn't be quite 32, but here's a way to at least get, is it 6? That's an easy one. Divide it a few times and then see what are the dent in the center, of course, because that's where the axle goes. Then you've got rim. Another way to do this is there is a circular mask with the mask pen. This can be helpful just to get a circle in here. I create the circle, I let go, then you can hold down spacebar to move it. I can shrink it up a little bit by letting go of spacebar. This gives me at least a ridge that's helpful. And if I clean it up a little, I could use a deformation to inflate it just a little bit. Smooth it out, just kind of chunky around the edges. Yeah, it's kind of ugly around the edges, got a little chunky, so I could use a dam standard just to clean it up. I love dam standard because it pinches when I use it, and the pinching really helps get a clean, tight looking edge. And also, if you hold down Alt, you can push it out instead of pushing it in, and this helps if you want to get a ridge rather than a cut. looks a little funky. I'm going to try to Z remesh it, see if that makes it look any better as far as the poly flow. I know this roundness and Dynamesh don't like each other. So it looks a little better, but maybe got a little wonky, but just do some smooths, cleans it up. Now I can divide it a few more times. Okay, so I just wanted to get a nice rim. Because I was using 8, that is becoming apparent. I'm going to crank up that symmetry to something a lot higher. This is way easier to get ridges in this way. Great. And then now I'll go back to 8. Just do the a lot of these have cuts in them, and that's pretty intense. It can be done, but it would be done with like a knife curve. That might work. This is when we change the poly tool. There's the poly group. This works. No, something like that. Delete the lower, because sometimes the knife tools or the slice tools don't like it when you have divisions. But let's see. Try knife one more time. It's doing something, so let's see. Bring it in. It cuts straight through, but it's not using radial symmetry. That's an issue. We can try slice. No, it doesn't use radial symmetry either. And then this might end up being a little trickier to get the cut out. But the simple part of like just creating a ridge, we can at least use to design something. And then we'll probably bring it into Maya and use the instance system to get a clean hubcap that rotates around. Much the way we did a hub with the Canon, we could do something like that. Let's just do the mask pen. There's too much radial symmetry in there. I'm going to take it down to 6. Accurate, but a bunch of them out there. And it's funny how much design work is spent on even hubcaps in a car. Probably an artist that works very specifically on hubcaps. I'm turning these into polygroups because I find polygroups, you can isolate them, and then you can use certain cool tools to clean their isolations up or their edges up. So I'm going to use this tool a lot in class just because it's a really fun one. But let's see, I think it's under geometry. You've got edge loop and group loops. I might have shown this before, but you click the button and it really cleans up the loops, or it creates panel lines in between the edge flow, and it really smooths out the loop. So now I could take something like this and just extrude it or move it down, and it ends up working out pretty well as a cut in. It's a really easy way to create those kind of cuts in. So again, the design here wasn't really, I wasn't matching any of these wheels, but it did, system did work. If I wanted to just do something really simple, let's go to that. Let's go back to here. I'm just gonna do something where you have a little bit of a cutout right here. Then we could do poly groups. So Control W with the mask. I'll isolate them, and then we'll hit the clean up that. Isolate them, and then you can do group loops, cleans up the edges, smooths it out, but often, you know, that's what we want. And then now I can push this in. We've got an extruded hubcap in. So cool way of making tires real fast in ZBrush. Hubcap might have some differences in, if you're looking at it kind of down the edge rather than like 3/4. There's sometimes a little more thought to be put into this edge, but it doesn't look terribly off. I just say that there's a little more bow that tires have that I don't have. So maybe the hubcap can bow out just a little bit, and then the overall tire in this center area here, inflate that just a little bit with the deformation. It's a tool down at the bottom, deformations, and I can just hit inflate. Just kind of pushes that out just a little bit. And at least on one side I got the bow out, but it doesn't look like I use the circle. Through the model. And then now I can inflate this on both sides, inflate balloon. That way it's not totally flat on the sides, which cars don't actually have. There we go. So yeah, cool way to create a tire real fast in ZBrush. There's all kinds of more detail to get into, you know, the narrowness and all kinds of stuff are important with accuracy, but obviously the radial symmetry works incredibly fast. And then you could even do, with a tire like this, you could even go in and write Goodyear on the side if you had enough poly detail, or that could show up in the texture. That's usually easier to put. Just wanted to show that cool tire trick. Very simple, quick way making tires. It'll be easy enough to follow that system. Okay, yeah, and Andrew, do you have any, let's see, I've not seen anything posted, but at least do you have anything we could talk about as far as today? Like I just want to know where you're at in the process.
Yeah. So full disclosure, this was midterms week for me, so it was a little bit lighter because I had other exams.
Sure.
But so I decided to move to Unreal. So
Okay.
like after just looking at stuff, I realized that the tools that I want, like Unreal overall was a little bit more work, but with all the tools that I get, it would make the actual project itself a lot easier.
Yes. And I mean, it's just going to be more beneficial for you as an environment artist to know that program.
Yeah, so I have a little bit of experience because we were using Unreal for our game project, but
awesome.
I'd never like set it up. So this week I spent my time, like I got the Unreal project set up. I got 3D Coat downloaded and working. And I was messing around with the design a little bit more. But most of my time was spent in Unreal because I'd never like set it up and got everything going myself. That was done by our designers for a game project. So
yeah, it usually is. That's
a learning.
Artists usually plug into that system rather than create it. So
yeah,
it's a different animal when you're creating your own system. There's so many things to set up. You know, the player camera, all the you know the terrain systems and stuff. So that's awesome. I'm happy you're going that direction. I think it's going to be very, very helpful. And then, yeah. Yeah. Where are you at in that process at this point?
So I have it all set up. It's kind of it's ready to go. And everything else, all the other programs are downloaded and working. My next step, I also created kind of like a table of like everything I need from the models and their textures and that kind of a thing. And my next step is going to be the what did you call it? Like the trim sheet, I guess.
Yeah. Awesome.
So that's going to be my next step, and using that to get the like the base mesh for the structures and everything.
Cool.
So
Okay.
I'll have like a, I don't want to say like prototype, but that type of thing, like for next week. As well as I'm hoping to do the ground textures and get those like plugged in, because Unreal has that thing where you can kind of go in and paint your ground texture and that
Yeah.
sort of thing. And
Yes.
that's a little bit complicated to set up for something that's seems kind of easy. So that'll be something I'll be doing this week as well.
Yeah, that's very exciting. As I was talking last week about the mix, mixed media, mixed material shaders, that's exactly that with Unreal. You can do that for landscapes. You can get a lot more out of your tiles, and that's something that you can reuse for not just levels, but like whole worlds, basically. Like,
Yeah.
wonderful. Cool. So that's exciting. You're going in that route. Yeah. What it is first you kind of need your tiles. Otherwise, I find you usually end up repainting the way that they work together, because the tiles really dictate how it looks. And so if the tiles are working, then you can just paint a tile here and a tile there. And so that's something that I would make sure I'd spend a lot of time on, is making those tiles fantastic.
That'll
Okay.
be like my big push for this week is the tiles. That's the main thing, and then everything else I said is like what comes after that.
Sure. Yeah. So you got your tiles and your trim sheet. And then the thing that I think is often left out, which you don't have to do now, but people seem to always use the defaults, and I feel like it's a bad idea. The sky dome.
Okay.
Like having a good sky dome really sets you apart with Unreal projects, because every Unreal sky dome that it comes with the default has like really bad Photoshop painting that's like clearly like an airbrush cloud that's masked. It's just like you don't notice it if you're just throwing it. It's like, okay, it's good enough. Somebody else was using it, it's good enough. But I find those to be hideous. So
Yeah.
it's something where you could bring in more color, more artistry, and everything is finding a good sky dome. And you can definitely download sky domes, but you're going with a painterly look, and in that case you're going to want to probably
Yeah, I'll be painting my own.
painting your own.
I've got it pulled up on my screen right now, and it's
Okay.
simultaneously the default one. It's both like too realistic and very fake looking.
Yeah,
it's really not great.
They use photos and they don't fix them. So I'm like, all right, I feel like they use those sky domes as defaults just to be sure that if somebody doesn't know what they're doing, they just move on, leave those there. But I find them awful. So definitely finding a better sky dome is something that should be done in the process. Okay, and then the pipeline with the trim sheets, you've got like I've seen the design of what like the shapes are going to be, but the overall design, like the overall look, is that? Yeah, wait, okay, no, we have seen that. Okay, because last week we saw the proxy
Yeah.
of it, right?
Do you want me to put it up in the chat again? Or
Yeah, just so we can. It's just like so I can make sure I'm talking about the correct thing instead of
yeah, totally.
It's 2 weeks ago. And just to walk me through your process again, you're using 3D Coat to paint it. is the rocks and the actual models. Were you using another program to create the sculpt of it, or?
So for the rocks last week, you recommended that at least for the rocks, but possibly for other things, I use ZBrush to like block it out because it's, really like fluid and easy when it comes to like those shapes. So I'll be doing that, and then um, I will be like reducing that to low poly and probably painting on those. I'm not quite sure. That's a little
Because
thing I'm a little.
I guess like at that point, there's not really much of a reason to use 3D coat because you can do it all in ZBrush.
Mhm.
Yes, and I want to go over that today. Poly painting in ZBrush, because it's got amazing tools for poly painting. The way that it works in ZBrush is it's vertex dependent, and I think 3D coat kind of works pretty similar using the voxel system, but it's vertex dependent. So every paint or every color goes and it's applied to a vertex. And so if you've got something that's high res, you can paint it whatever you want. And then if you're baking it to a low res, then you can take that color from the vertices through and turn it into a texture map on a low res. I have Substance at least one chance to use it today, because it did the thing again where like it says this is your last chance to open Substance, although I sent in all of my credentials, so I should be able to next week have it and everything. But I think I can bring in a rock today, show you how I would transfer over that color texture, and that's something I would love to talk about today. So it just, if going through multiple programs, I find it's easier. The least amount of programs you go through, the more steps you add, the more complexity. It just feels like it's wasting time. So if you can do it all in ZBrush, I feel like it'd be easier. But I know 3D Coat has wonderful painting tools, and if there's something specific there, I totally understand using it. But we could at least get it started in ZBrush with poly painting. So if let's see, but yeah, that's why I brought it up as far as 3D Coat, is just whether or not we need to do the 3D Coat at all, or if we could do it all in ZBrush. If there's any specific reason for doing 3D Coat and not just using ZBrush.
I think I kind of had my heart set on using 3D Coat because that was recommended to me by a number of like hand painted artists. They said they really
Sure.
like it, so I kind of wanted to at least give it a go. They also
Sure.
said that it feels a lot more like you're painting in Photoshop versus
ZBrush definitely
ZBrush
doesn't,
feels like you're
feel like
painting in
Photoshop.
ZBrush. So
Yeah, ZBrush is more akin to like painting directly on a model, like because
Yeah.
they layers and everything don't work, and so I totally get that. I've enjoyed a Mudbox for painting textures more, but for the actual Z Z paint with the vertice painting, I do find that it works really well in ZBrush. Just, like there's all kinds of tools that work really well, but I get what you're saying, that like 3D Coat it probably has a better feel, and that I can't really speak to. I don't spend a lot of time in 3D Coat, so I can't exactly speak to that. I do want to show you the 3D painting tools in ZBrush so you know them, so you understand them, so you can utilize them. And then if you just need to take it directly into 3D Coat, because the other thing is 3D Coat seems to be a sculpting program as well. And if you can do everything in 3D Coat, that's great. It's nice to pick one and not have to bounce between a bunch of programs. It's easier on your checkbook too. So, like you're not always, you don't always have all the tools available, the next computer, the next job and everything. So it's nice to at least have an optimized system where you're not bouncing between a million programs. That's my preference, but it's each their own. If you make it work, you make it work. But I'd love to at least show a demo of how to create a hard surface stuff in ZBrush and then paint it, and then how to get that paint off, because I think that's something that a lot of people haven't experienced. Is once you paint in ZBrush, what do you do with that ZBrush vertex painting? Because it's not clear in Substance how to get it. I just want to show you how to get that.
I guess my big kind of, I wasn't sure what to do in that pipeline is like, so I have the sculpted rock, and let's say even if it just has like a base color and like base like kind of gradient coming up from the bottom to give it some depth. Once that, like, if that was eventually going to be baked on a low poly model, like how do I get that out of like what's my next step, I guess?
That's why I wanted to talk about it. Is I feel like regardless of if you're using 3D Coat, all of you, Lily, Margot, and Andrew, should know how to get the vertex painting out of ZBrush, just in case it comes up ever that you're having to just use ZBrush or whatnot. Because like I said, I don't have 3D Coat. I can't really speak on that, but I can show you how to get everything you need out of ZBrush. And we'll do that today. Basically, the easiest first way to explain it is when you bring in a model and you want to import. Let's see, I've got a one here that might work. Bring in a model and you want to bake the color onto it, like this creature here. This, I think, was using color that I had baked from ZBrush. And just like baking the normal map, we use the baking tool under, where is it? Under, what is it? The texture, it's not here. These views. Texture set settings. The texture set settings has the bake mesh maps option. And here it is. So bake mesh maps, just like you're baking a normal map, anything else. You bake it here where it says material ID. And the color source should be set to vertex color. Generally, it's set to material color.
I don't think you're sharing your screen.
Oh, I'm not sharing my screen. Damn it.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, thank you, Andrew. Thank you. Please. I'm sorry. Thank you. Okay, here we are. Here is a creature that I was talking about. It has vertex painting that I made in ZBrush. And how we get it off, it is under Bake Mesh Maps, which is the texture set settings. I think you can also find it somewhere up here. Bake Mesh Maps under Edit. Basically, you have your normal map and all of your other curvature maps and everything, but ID map, this is a map that comes from your model, from your high-res model, and generally it's set to material color, but if you set it to vertex color, what happens is it bakes your ID map with your vertex color paint of whatever that high-res model has. And I want to go through the process of painting on a ZBrush model. What I'm going to do today is I'll make a tree, stump, paint it up real nice, show you how to like create a real, there's a couple of cool tools for creating tree stumps and with branches and things. But we'll bake the color directly out from here using the vertex color. Now, when you bake it, it shows up, and it's going to take a little while, so I'm not going to do it until we go through that process, but it shows up here under mesh maps as usually is a material ID map, and that's where it's placed. But I don't want it as an ID map, I want it as a color map. So I figure out which one it is, and I just make sure that I find it in my textures that are for my current project. So this is where it gets just a little confusing, is that it's baked. Here we go. So I want to look at textures. There, materials, textures. So these are the textures of my project. I just had to go into my asset scroller and look at project. So it's just the things that are connected to my current project. And then color map is what I had it named. It might show up as ID map, but basically this is a vertex color map. And instead of putting it in my ID map, what you do is you go into your layers and you create a fill layer. And you go to your, what is it, in the properties of your fill layer, you go into your base color, you find your material ID map, and you place the material ID in your base color, and that plops your vertex paint job onto your diffuse. And then that is, it's baked out already, so you can even export this map as a baked texture, but this is how you apply it to your model in Substance Painter. And then you can go from there, like changing roughness values. I'm going to turn off height and normal, but the roughness values are fun to play with here because it's a little too shiny in the beginning. Turn that up, keep metallic at 0, and that gives me something to start with. And then, you know, this is a kind of more of a realistic, or not realistic, but it's got fleshy alien skin, so I could do other cool things like combining different materials here. Like there's all kinds of skin materials, which are not what I want, but if I layer them, you can do some really cool things. I'm gonna go for a smart material. It's a trick that has been working for me, like finding the skin here. It's kind of is like feverish skin. If I put this as a new layer and it's got the color layer underneath it, what I did was just turn off the color here, and it gives me a good kind of interesting base. So this is my skin, okay, skin base. These two look like they're the color. And so I can change this from overriding the color, I can make it multiplying the color. And then still overriding it pretty intensely. So let's see if I do the whole thing. Yeah, so that's multiplying it, or we could overlay, but this starts to pull from the underneath color and adding it together. And that's one way to do it. So you were talking about the gradients, and let's do something like that, where we create something in ZBrush. We'll spit out a model that is a low poly, and then we'll spit out something that is a high poly. We'll bake that high poly texture on, and there's sometimes multiple layers that I like to do with vertex paint. 3D coat could be totally useful for this as well if it's using vertice painting. I'm not 100% sure it is, but if it is, you can do some cool things with the material ID as well. Let's see, I'm going over a bunch of things. I want to kind of explain this simply so it doesn't get out of control. First, I want to talk about what the material ID map is. We had some talk about that with the Canon, but the Canon, we usually just made masks instead of using a material ID map. But let me find a, I know I've got some CG models that actually have material IDs ready to go. So I'm just going to look up an old model in here. I don't know if this one has it or not. I know it's got vertex painting, but I don't know if it has the material ID map, which is, it's basically we paint the model sometimes bright colors when we're really wanting the materials to be specific. This is a boat I did. That's the Discovery, which was the first European boat that came through, well, the first British boat that came through the Northwest. And then poly paint. Let's see what happens when I turn it on. Okay, so this one, it looks like I was doing at least just kind of a base color. It's not very pretty, but it is a base color which has a lot of noise in it. So that's not going to work as a material ID map. Let me see if I can find another one. Here we go. This is exactly what I'm talking about. So this is a material ID map. It is not for color. This is not, I don't want any object to look like this. The reason why these colors are really bright is so that I can select them when I am working in Substance Painter. So that's what a material ID map is supposed to be in Substance Painter. But we can trick it to say that the material ID map is actually the color map. I think I've got this even set up already. So I'll show real quick what a material ID map is, and then I'm going to go into how to trick it and make it think that it's a color map instead. So let's see. Scorpion low. So I'm just grabbing this model that should be connected to the ZBrush model we were just looking at. And then when I bake a high resolution mesh under edit, bake mesh maps, I'm going to make sure the ID map is set from material color to vertex color. This is going to grab my ZBrush vertex model. And then we go back to common, going to find my model and fuselage high. Hopefully that one has the vertex ID. I don't know. It's been a while since I exported it. But we'll bake it and see what it looks like. So it goes through bakes normal map. Looked like it baked the ID map, which does have the color to it. So first off, you get just your model with the normal map and everything on it, the curvature and ambient occlusion. But I want to use my material ID, and it actually is already plugged in. And if you look here, this is my material ID map. That looks remarkably similar to this map. So that's baked down. What that is for is when I create a new material, say if I'm making a steel material over this whole thing, I only want it to show up on the windows or certain panels. You can right click on the material and say add mask with color selection. What happens then is when you in the color selection you are allowed to, under properties, you can pick color, and then it gives you that map that you got out as ZBrush. And I could say the orange parts, the windows, are steel, and now that's what a material map is designed to do. So this is for working with models with all kinds of different materials, and you want to isolate them in a high res rather than try to draw out where the separations are by hand or by polygon. You isolate them in the high res by painting something like this. So this is really helpful for mechanical stuff. I find it really, there's all kinds of, like if I had bolts or if I wanted to change a material just in this area, that can be a real pain in the ass if I didn't have my color selection set up. So it's a wonderful way to work with materials in Substance Painter, ZBrush pipeline. But what I don't have here is the vertex paint actually applied. And if I went and grabbed it, it of course would be this bright color rather than the like whatever color I want this to be. So I can apply it right now to this new layer that I made. If I go to my properties on that layer, you can apply this color map to the base color, and there you get the material ID applied as a color map. But what I want to show is how to paint in ZBrush, and then we can create something cool, and then bake it with actual color, and go from there. So let's do that. I'm going to do a demo of a tree, and then we will add vertex color to it. then we will create a low res using Z remesher, just a quick one. Use UV unwrap to create quick UVs for this. This is like the quick ZBrush pipeline. There's all kinds of really quick turnaround tools. Just isn't the best for poly count maybe, but it is. It does work out pretty well, all of these tools. And then we'll bake, after we get a low res with a UV, we'll bake our high res vertex color onto that. I'm just going to show that. It's nice to have it recorded, and in case you decide to go this direction, or for any other reason you need, like you said, the gradient or the subtle changes. So that's what I'll be working on now. If there is any other questions, feel free to shout them out or put them in the chat. I really like addressing specific issues that people have, because it's going to be the most pertinent to your own projects and the easiest to remember later. So if there is anything, yeah, I'd love to hear it as well. Okay, so I'm going to do a new document because this one has a very large file in it. So let's see, revert. Is that just going to give me? No, I don't want that. I want a new one. What is it? Initialize ZBrush somewhere? Yeah, here we go. I just want to start from 0 so my memory is clean. And I'm going to use Z-spheres. This is a wonderful tool. This is why I'm bringing this up. Z-spheres are fantastic if you want to make any kind of humanoid body, any multiple limbed body. Z-spheres are really, really cool. They just take a little second to get used to. Basically, it shows up as this sphere. If you want to move it, you can use the move tools. If you want to create new spheres, use the draw tool to draw objects or new spheres onto this tool. And what it does, it creates this connection thing. Looks like an ice cream cone or I don't know, electrical wire thing. But if you hit A on the keyboard, it very quickly shows you what this will look like if it's turned into a poly mesh. And there's a little kind of pipeline that I use with Z-spheres. It's basically I create the Z-spheres, I move them around, I get them into the right shape, and then I hit A and I say make polymesh 3D. And then you go to that, and this one is no longer a Z-spheres, it's just or the polymesh 3D one, it's no longer Z-spheres, it's now a Dynamesh model. You can do whatever you want with it. So if we go back to my Z-sphere, hit A, what the A is doing is there's this down here, adaptive skin. I'm not clear on everything that adaptive skin is used for. I believe it's sometimes used for rigging objects, but it's way too complicated. I would highly recommend against it because nobody animates with it or anything. But what adaptive skin does is when you hit the preview button, which is A on the keyboard, if you're in the Z-sphere mode, it will turn it into a Dynamesh Poly 3D, and it can be very, very useful. So I'm going to go back to the initial Z-sphere and just point out that if I wanted to make like a humanoid, I could just create kind of a torso, create a shoulder bone, an arm, shrink it down a little bit. If your brush is too big, it grabs the other Z-spheres around it when you're moving. But do something like that. That's arms, legs. Arms, legs, and this is the kind of thing where I'm not even caring about necessarily the shapes of it. I just need this distribution of polys to kind of work out in a way that I can sculpt on it later. It's like an armature for sculpture, which is just a framework, and then you put a head in there, and you can do a lot of things with this. You can add fingers, you can do all kinds of stuff to get like humanoid, obviously, very simplistic in the beginning, but it makes a great armature to start with. I could sculpt on that. I could do whatever I want with it. And then that's, forelimbs. That's easy enough. If you wanted to make an insect, you do a whole lot more with, more and more elements, more and more extremities or whatever. You can do whatever you want with Z-spheres. That's why it's really easy and useful. There's another tool called the Z sketch A, and what is it? Z sketch A. There's another brush tool. Where is it? It's not adaptive skin. It's Z sketch down here. When you do edit sketch, this is a whole nother thing where you're drawing on your model with Z spheres, and this gets a little confusing, but basically you're creating another model that can eventually be turned into an adaptive skin that's over your Z sphere model. So that can be over anything too. You can use any model to do Z sketch, but what Z sketch is doing is it's adding Z spheres over whatever you're looking at here when you say edit sketch. And then if you wanted to get this Z sphere sketch model off to its own model, you hit A, creates the adaptive skin preview, and then you hit make polymesh 3D, and then you've got this thing, which right now just looks kind of like a weird dealy bob, but it actually might be something that I end up using for trees. Sometimes Z sketch is actually really useful for creating like extra lumpy trees. But let's go back, and I'm going to start from the beginning and make a tree. It's going to be a little simpler than this, but it will have a lot of appendages because trees have branches. So first off, let's make a kind of a trunk that has some amount of distance. And then we can maybe have an extra, turn off the symmetry, have an extra branch on one, and then maybe the trunk has been like cut off here, and you know this branch got a little bit of life in it, but most of it is dead and cut off there. So it's looking like this. It's kind of weeble wobble at this point. So we need some roots down here. Roots have it can often be many, like 8 or 6 or 5, 4, but usually some sort of odd number works better than even, just because the 4 looks a little too much like legs, and that's not what we're used to seeing with roots. So I'll do something where it's got 5. I think that'll actually work out pretty well. So at first, it's just kind of funky. Then I want to add a few more turns and twists to the roots to make them a little more than just lumps. So the tree itself is pretty bubbly, doesn't have any interest in it. I love things that twist and turn. That's always a lot more fun. So I'm going to give it some asymmetry. And then the other thing is it's all round, and trees aren't usually like that. But I'll fix that later. That's the thing about Z-spheres. You kind of have to live with how ugly it is in the beginning, and then deal with making it look a little prettier once you get your overall kind of rough shape worked out. About how it could like wrap around a rock. That's always really fun. So maybe I'll just make a really quick rock out of a sphere. Make it a polymesh 3D. Do some clip curves. This works really well. Or just flattening things out. Turn it into Dynamesh so I can get a little more detail there. A little too geometric, which is why trim dynamic always comes in handy for adding a little more organicness to a rock. you know, it still gives that faceting feel, but you can break it up a little bit so it's not quite so boring. And all good rocks have cracks. There are some wonderful ore brushes, downloadable brushes. I highly recommend um, for creating cracks and things, but I do use the defaults whenever I'm involved with ZBrush. Dam standard does work really well. It's just the thing about dam standard is it's kind of soft if you cut it in like that. But what I like to do for full control is I'll cut something in, and then I'll hold down Alt and adjust the edges so the edges kind of have a little sharper organic feel to them. And I find that makes some really interesting cracks because I'm not totally stuck on one specific stroke. You know, breaking up the idea of the stroke a little bit is good. And then you can always go back and hit it with trim dynamic, which gives it that feel of wear, where some of the crack has maybe worn away from water damage or something, and then just basically giving it a little more fun than just on its own. And so we'll start with something like that. And I can go back to the rock later, but it's a good shape to begin with. And I'll go to my Z-spheres. I'm going to append that rock. And we can move it down. And now what could be cool is if the tree kind of grew out of the rock or was wrapping around the rock, I can adjust that with my Z-spheres, moving these roots to kind of surround the rock. When it goes transparent, it usually means some sort of weird problem, but it doesn't seem to be causing any issue. Just seems all right. Okay, maybe one more root tendril. And some of this is going to look real ugly now, but it cleans up pretty good. This one kind of goes out a little too horizontally, so let's move some of these up a little bit. Even give them a little bend. The WERT for move, draw, or QWER for move, draw, and rotate really helpful with Z-spheres because it's designed to move quickly. The Z-spheres system. So if you're using your key commands, this works out really well. We'll see if I keep. It's not too bad. Okay, so some things. Just kind of looking at the overall look. Definitely everything's still very bubbly, but I'll fix that later. Right now, I just want to get the overall silhouette worked out, make it interesting and cool, and see if I have to. Feel like it lab that happens, and it gets a little mad about that. But if I keep them away from each other, it's fine. Down Alt will grab everything in the chain, which can be useful, rather than just moving an individual Z-sphere. Okay, so something like this actually is going to work out pretty well. It's definitely needs to feel more organic, but I can do a lot of that sculpting. So what I'll do is take this, and we'll make, I hit A to see the preview, and we'll make it a Polymesh 3D. It's going to pop out a new model over here, but I want to apply it where I was working in this tool. And I'm just going to turn off this Z sphere subtool so that I don't see it anymore. And that way I keep it and I'm not throwing it away. It's all in the tool. But I've got this Polymesh 3D. This is the one that is ready to go, ready to be cleaned up. I'm going to turn on Dynamesh at this point so that I am redistributing the polys. And then what I want to do is start cleaning this up, making it more of a tree form. We'll cut off the top here with clip curve to give it a feeling like somebody came at it with a chainsaw. And then a lot of the faceting can really easily be just smoothed down with the smooth brush. And then what I like to do at first is build a form that feels organic. Something that's I find very important with trees is how they are a bunch of tubes of vessels bringing water from the roots all the way up to the branches. And so you have this flow where there's no point in the tree that the volume is different. Basically the tops of the branches, if you add all the volume up, it should be the volume of the trunk. It's all just a bunch of tubes and going up to each individual branch. So around the trunk, that's where they're all contained and together. And then the roots, they split apart as well. So they get thinner and thinner the more they split out, but the volume of the entire tree kind of remains the same from the tips of the roots to the tops of the trees. It's just about a bunch of individual tubes that are vessels for water and nutrients, bringing it from the ground. So there might be some things that I'm finding speaking to that, which is that the trunk got a little too thick here and it got a little too thin up here. So maybe we do kind of open up this area a little more. That gives the volume consistency a better chance. Also, since this branch comes out, this trunk part will be a little smaller because a lot of tubes end up going in that direction. And then the most fun thing to do with trees is give them a little twist so they're not just totally vertical. They often will grow twisting because of the sun and various changes in their environment. So they start out moving one direction, and then they often will twist into another direction. Twist is always really fun with old trunks and stuff. Gives a lot of flavor. All right, so still some very mechanical areas down here. Trim dynamic, getting rid of any area that's a little too round. They also these kind of round out pretty fat and flat, and maybe we want to pinch them. Pinch is a wonderful brush in ZBrush for doing anything, for cleaning up, getting more detail where there isn't detail, but also if you just want to shrink something a little bit, pinch works out really well. So I do want to shrink these ends so that they don't feel like big nubs. And we could potentially have cards for the ends of the roots, very, very thin ends of the roots. But right now I just want to shrink the tips so that they don't feel too nubby at the end. So it helps with that if you have low enough geo, but this one is pretty high geo, so I think be able to shrink anything with smooth. If your geo is really, really small, then when you hit smooth, it kind of shrinks the volume. But if your geo is very, very dense, that doesn't quite work as well. Just going to move some things around to be more my liking. Get rid of this weird lump. Trees do have all kinds of fun lumps, but one of the things trees, any organic material tends to not have too much flat or concave space. Most everything's a bunch of volumes built up onto themselves, as is the human body. And trees have the same thing because they're a bunch of tubes. They have a bunch of volume in every point. So even, you know, the trunk can be really, really round, or it can be really lumpy, but you still want to think about them as being a bunch of tubes flowing through. Okay, so say, well, let's see, there's some areas in which, because I didn't have backface culling set up on my clay buildup brush, it did this, where flatten out that one area. That's a little frustrating. We can isolate it and look at it from a different side to see how flat that got. I don't like that. Definitely going to turn on my auto mask, my brush, turn off backface mask so that I'm no longer punching through to the backside. But the other thing that is helpful with trees is inflate. I might have mentioned this tool before. It's very wonderful when you just want to fill something up, make it not feel too flat. And then it also works well if you want to shrink things. Holding down Alt kind of deflates in a particular direction. That can be helpful sometimes. Right here, it's one trunk got thin and fat. And sometimes maybe there's a gnarl or some reason for that to happen, but generally the volume seems to be pretty consistent on these trees so that it doesn't get in certain areas. So you want to, or too fat. It's like trying to find that balance that feels believable. Okay. So just making the overall form. I'm not thinking about the texture because I have a whole nother system for creating the physical texture, but I might think about kind of the separation of materials at this point. You've got your bark, and then you've got your wood, and usually the bark on these older trees that have been cut a while back is very separate and chunky, gnarly, and the wood would be a much different texture altogether. So I'll get to that in a second, but usually how I like to work in ZBrush is giving the overall form kind of a quick block out, and then we will do like a Z remesh pass so that I have a cleaner model. Because yeah, I think this model is just a little messy with Dynamesh. If I gave it a Z remesh pass, let's see what it gives me. And that's why I didn't want to do any detail yet, is because I was thinking of Z remeshing it. Yeah, and that's a nice clean model, a lot easier to deal with, and it's going to be really easy to add high detail surface detail to this. So definitely happy to start there. So, just checking in on the chat. Okay. So yeah, this is a good place to start. Now I can divide this tree a few times. Let's get rid of the nub stuff going on here. I'll just use my smooth tool to kind of now, so at least it turns into a point rather than a nub. And then maybe clip curve right there, so flatten it. Now I can divide it, and now it's going to be perfect for adding all kinds of detail. I want to bring in an alpha for that. There's a one that works pretty well for trees to start with. What is it? It's like lightning or something. This one here. That's not too bad. But the way that I'm going to use it is with Stitch Basic. I think I probably brought this one up at some point already, but Stitch Basics is really cool for doing stitches. But if you wanted to swap out that alpha with a different alpha, you can use it to create, more bark stuff. This is not really that great, so I'm going to make my own. Let's just go find some tree bark. Find an image that has what I'm looking for, which is not too much photo information, like too much color information like this. It's very noisy. Something like this works pretty well. I'm just looking for the dark lines of the bark. And so, yeah, anything like this, that looks pretty good. can see some watermarks in there though. This one's noisy, but I bet if I brought it into Photoshop, we can keep it pretty clean. Yeah. So yeah, if this one, I just wanted to reduce the noise in it, so I'm gonna I'll do a couple things where I can just focus on the contrasty lines here, get rid of the color, add it again, and then this time I want to denoise it before I do that. So reduce noise, does that help? Softer, and then it kind of works better when I crunch down the numbers. If you're doing realism, a little noise is okay, but I bet I could get rid of some of this too. Let's see. Just by blurring it a little. There we go. Because yeah, noise is not the best for these alphas. Okay, now I need to make sure that it is tiled up and down. I don't care about left and right, but up and down is important. You can already see that it doesn't go all the way to the edges. So what I want to do is a filter, other offset. I'm going to tile it up and down. So instead of horizontal, switch to vertical, 256. Yeah. And I'm just going to use my rubber stamp to fill in these blanks. Okay, so I've got a tiled alpha. We'll save this as a JPEG. Then I'll go to my Stitch Basic. We'll import and just duplicate it so I'm not breaking my original. Duplicate it, and we've got, see, I thought I cloned it, Stitch Basic 1. And then I'll go into my alpha, which it's using for the application of the stitch, and we're going to import that alpha that I just made. So I'm imagining that I probably did this wrong. No, let's see. Needs to bring down the intensity. I mean, it gives me a bark texture, and that's cool, but I think it's popping out the bark, and that might work just fine. Sometimes I like to push it in rather than pop it out. But I think this will work fine if I have enough detail here. So just going to draw a bark around the tree. Some of it can overlap, but if you overlap, then the noise kind of shows up a lot more. So sometimes what I'll do is the areas that overlap, I'll hit it again with a trim dynamic to kind of reduce some of the noise, and then it just gets to more of the you just see the cracks, and that's kind of what I'm looking for. But it's a great way to get started with a really intense texture, and then you can add all the cracks you want by hand and anything else by hand, and then we'll add the color texture. And this is going to work really well for color texture, including making the bark areas darker, because it is a divided model, and the low res is simple and the high res has all the cracks in it, and the low res doesn't. What that does is it creates a system in which you can use the cavity maps in ZBrush to paint with, and eventually you end up just, it's a lot more detail you get out of your paint job if you can. It's like dry brushing. If you've taken Danny's class, if you're dry brushing a model, you're kind of popping out the highlighted parts, and usually you want to push in the dark parts with a darker color. So we'll be able to do that with the vertex painting. Lots of detail in this one. This is maybe overkill on as far as detail. It's a lot more realism than I was expecting, but the tree can be real. That's fine. The area that I don't want overlap in, I just mask it, and then I can add the exactly at the scale that I want without overlapping edges. Fun way to make bark, really easy. Now I can get a little more complicated where you get the creases in between. You know, like the bark gets a little more chunky in certain areas, especially in the lower area. It starts to kind of peel away from the tree. There's a lot more interaction with the soil, so a lot more beaten up around there. People kick it, whatnot. Who would kick a tree? I don't know. Bigger cracks is just fun to see. It's more interesting. Kind of a system of design is always fun when you have primary, secondary, tertiary. It ends up just having more interest rather than just a single layer, unless you're doing Pixar or something. Pixar is funny. If you look at their models, they're really detailed up close, really simple from a distance, and there's generally very little mid detail at all, just in the way that Pixar models work, because all the detail is either tiled or just a simple shape. You can see how quickly noise becomes a problem. Something be really annoying in ZBrush is too much noise just doesn't make a good normal map. So I try to keep the noise level down. Keep it down in there. Small in the details, so I'm going to smooth it out. Brush. Okay. Yeah, there we go. And all of the cracks up here, but I'm going to quickly save this just in case. No. Some trees could be done very easily just by unwrapping a model and doing all this with just texture tiled up and down. That's a very easy way to make a tree, but you don't get quite this control, and you also don't get to paint it the way that I'm about to. So this is going to be fun. Definitely break up this bark. You never see bark this smooth, so break up the edges. Got a little bubbly, but hitting it with trim dynamic kind of gives it that crispness again. Okay, so some areas a little too noisy, some areas are too smooth. Just kind of go through, work all that out. Then we'll move on to the painting. It looks weird and no sweat. I'll just use inflate to fix some of this. Maybe get some of these kind of going into the cracks, trying to suck the water out of the rock. Yeah, that feels a little better. Just something that's natural about the way these turn and curve. I can make it feel a little better. Okay. And then, yeah, just all the little details on the edges. Alternating between dam standard and then holding alt to kind of push out in areas that I want a little angle just to get more interest. Not to make too much noise, give it more flow than noise. All right. Okay, so a couple of areas still feel really stiff, like here. Just kind of soften it out a little bit. And then right into the rock. That's no good. Okay, something like this could work. It's a little too uniform. These three roots, they're just too uniform. So I'm gonna pull this one down. Up a little. Okay, something like this will work. And then we want to add some color to it. Okay, so the color can be done with the basic brushes. The standard brush works really well. just because there's no weird things applied to it, so it just works as a basic kind of paintbrush. But then you can also apply things to it that'll make it do what you want. So it's a good thing to start with, and I usually clone that and begin using the basic brush or the standard brush. Just a little more detail in here. Could use some more details. I know it's rings in a tree aren't a spiral, but I thought it would be more fun. Maybe even some gashes coming through from when it was chopped on the chainsaw or something. Okay, but the first basic thing would be like a base coat of color, which is probably, I like to start out darker and then build up brighter. So we could fill the whole thing with a dark kind of wood color. And I'll start with the standard brush to do that. A standard brush I'm going to clone so that this is now going to be my coloring brush. Standard 1. Then turn off add and make it into RGB. So now I am going to paint whatever color I want on here. And that's how we get started, but obviously there's a lot more to it than that. So I need to find kind of a bark color. Let's look at some of the bark references. This color is pretty decent. That kind of it was brown, but there's some desaturation in there. So I'm going to start with a darker brown, desaturated brown. So we can draw it on. That takes a while though. So there's a quick way to fill the whole thing. You could just say color, fill. Now fill the whole color or fill the whole object with this color. And then now something I should do is change this area into more of a brighter wood color. And we'll just do that to begin with. The airbrushiness of it, or the softness of the edges, can be changed with the focal shift. And you can also add alphas to it if you wanted to draw with alphas. So that's useful, but there are some other tools for bringing in color information from photographs that I do want to show. So first off, I'm going to turn off my alpha, just fix my color shift so it's a little sharper. And I'm just separating the wood from the bark here. And you know, maybe there's some more wooded areas up here. And then the other thing we could do is an overall color shift. I know, Andrew, you were talking about that with like brighter colors, usually more saturated colors up here, darker desaturated colors down here. That's often the way that it goes. We could do a little bit of that at the end, but I do like to start with some amount of darkerness on the bottom. So I'm going to have a more airbrushy brush and kind of very, very light intensity RGB and just hit the base a little bit with some darkerness just to ground it to the rock a little bit. Then the other thing is getting the bark to pop out a little bit, so it's not just all one lumpy brown color. I'm going to hit it with kind of a desaturated lighter brown, but much more gray, something along like this. But in order to keep the bark dark color in the bark creases, instead of just hitting the whole thing, I'm going to go to my standard brush. I'm going to turn on cavity mask, and that'll hit the recessed areas in a different way than it hits the cavity areas. So crank it up a little more. Sometimes it gives this like kind of noisy pattern that it's not the greatest. But if you do it a little lighter, it can work pretty well. Just here to bump up the bark a little bit. And so this is just one of those ways in which it's like Substance Painter has some systems like this using the curvature maps and smart materials and all kinds of stuff. But it's cool to be able to do it directly on your high res model because you have full control. And once you put it on there, you can go in and really look at how it's getting in there in the cracks and see if that's working for you. In most cases, it's not too bad. It's actually looking pretty good here. But in certain areas, maybe I want to add some darker cracks. I can also combine my color and my sculpting at the same time. So with the dam standard, I can turn on the normal Z sub that's in dam standard, turn on RGB so it's got a crack in there. And when I draw with my dam standard, it's cutting in, giving me some darkness to it. So that way, when I'm drawing in a new crack, I'm actually adding some color to it as well. This can be very, very useful for kind of more hand-painted stuff, combining the cracks, especially if we're going to go into the rock. The rock's going to be a little more gray, but we can combine the darkness that would be in a crack with the dam standard, and it ends up working out pretty well. Get the intensity just right. Working out pretty well to see the cracks being kind of dark, and that'll work even in all kinds of situations. I'm gonna wait on the stone. The stone needs a little more love as far as texture. I think I'm gonna use some photo stuff in a minute, but let's finish off the tree first. There's cracks here and there that had some darkness to it. That just looks like I'm drawing with a pencil, but I bet when I hit it with a few other color swashes and then maybe even, oh yeah, another key trick with painting in ZBrush is if you want a color that's in your view, you can hit C, it'll grab whatever's your mouse is over. So if I want this wood color, I can hit C. That way I don't have to try to match it by hand. And then, yeah, just a little lighter pop to the top, and maybe just the whole thing with a little bit of gray to desaturate it, just a hair. Right here. Okay. Cool things out of this, huh? Spot wooden. Maybe sharpen the edges here. Color when I don't want crack. These shattered rather than cut off, so it might be acting a little differently. Cool. Okay, so I got some color. There's some variation, top to bottom a little bit, and then there's variation in the bark. So it's got some amount of variation from bark to crack of the bark and everything. But yeah, this will be very easy to transfer to Substance Painter to the other model. All I have to do with this tree is I need a low res and I need to be able to UV it. So basically we'll take this one here and see if the low res works. And generally, we usually need to fix it, but this low res looks pretty good. So maybe I start with this, see how it works. I just need to UV unwrap it. There's a really wonderful plugin in ZBrush, the was it UV Master in ZBrush. And turn off symmetry and just say unwrap. Although if there is any polygroups, this helps. So when we're looking at this kind of thing, basically, where is the seams going to be? That's important. And generally, I don't really care about seams underneath in areas, especially where we don't really see them. So maybe I'll paint this into its own polygroup here. And that one will basically be able to kind of hide a lot of the seams around these corners that will cause all kinds of issues if I don't. UV unwrapping is all about trying to cut the seam in just the right spot, and then usually the unwrap goes just fine. ZBrush has a wonderful pelt mapping system with the UV Master. It works great, but it's always about how you cut up the seams. So I would say that's probably good, even though it's a little sporadic. It's all in areas that are hidden, so that might end up be fine. If I really needed this to be optimized for a game, I'd probably bring it into Quad Draw, clean it up a little more, and then at that point I could adjust my UV seams in Maya. But in ZBrush, you can adjust them just by creating separate polygroups for each UV shell. And here, see, there's one little spot that overlapped. I didn't want that, but overall, this is going to go pretty well. The top also is an area, any perpendicular area always needs its own UV shell, or at least a seam in the right spot. So cutting a spot there. And then this is an area that could totally do better with its own UV system, own UV shell, and then even maybe breaking it up into two pieces isn't the worst idea, because this kind of branch, it's not going to know how to separate these kind of branches. So separate some of these and that little top area. Cool. So that's probably pretty decent for a UV shells for the breaking up the polygroups. This one could be a little cleaner. It's not, the edges are a little funky, and when you see seam edges doing that, generally it shows up later as a problem that you got to fix. So I like to keep my UV seams as clean as I can. And with zero remesh, it sometimes can be a problem because of the spirals that will sometimes show up with Z-remesh. But if you get a clean Z-remesh and there's no spirals, that's great, because you can create this nice clean edge loop going all the way around, and that's a nice clean seam. So that should work for that seam. Now the whole thing will be unwrapped when I hit the button. So let's go back to Z plugin. Use existing seams. I don't have any yet, so I'm going to use polygroups. We'll say unwrap, and it does a wonderful job of unwrapping this stump, but I can't tell. So how do I tell? If you go to UV Master and you hit flatten, it only works with objects with no subdivision. So I'm going to have to just copy it out, see if this worked. If you go to Z plugin, it's the thing at the bottom called flatten. This shows you what your UV map looks like. This is actually not terrible, although there's all kinds of unused space that I could fix in Maya. But it's not terrible. It's unwrapping in all of the areas that I want. It's got a nice seam, in kind of pretty clean seam. So it did a pretty good job. This is a good start of an unwrap. But don't leave or save your file like this, because it is literally flattened. It's not a UV texture editing window. We've actually flattened it, and so you have to go back and unflatten to go back to your initial model. And here we are here, and I can export this one into Maya, but I do recommend getting rid of your polygroups before you export. The UVs are still going to be there, but I'm going to turn all of these polygroups into one polygroup so the model doesn't break when I export it. If you use the export master, sometimes you can avoid that, but I find when you're exporting into Maya, it's better to have everything as one polygroup, otherwise it falls apart and it comes in a million different pieces. So let me make a folder for this. Low, the low poly, and then for the high poly, we'll go back to the model that has all the subdivisions and details and model and stuff. Go back to my super high res, use this one for the high poly, and just getting to the highest subdivision. I'll export this as tree stump high. Some of this definitely could use a little work. I could also put some moss in there. That's a really fun thing to do because moss is going to look a lot better. It's taking a while on these coordinates. I don't think I need 7. I think we can be fine at 6. So let's do 6 subdivisions and then tree stump high. It's amazing how one subdivision definitely does speed things up quite a bit. Still taking its time though. Let's do a 5, I think. Hopefully I didn't ruin anything here. Well, Nebula's napping, but she's ready to cause some ruckus as soon as she's done. I was looking at the Space Needle, which is out there. All right, ZBrush, come on, work with me. Thinking, give it a little more time. Just really should have saved. Oh, yeah, we got it. Okay. So yeah, it was 6, took a while. I'm going to bring it down to 5 just to make this example work a little faster. There we go. It's merging the UV coordinates. It doesn't actually need to because we don't use UV coordinates on the high res. We only use it on the low res, but it's got to do that anyway. Okay, now I'm going to take it into Substance Painter. I'm going to find my low res. Now, generally, I do take it into Maya first. I'll just look at it here. Basically, this is okay, but there's a lot of unused space, and I swear I could get more information in the texture if I played with this UV arrangement a little better. But it'll work for now. It'll do fine. Then we want to bake the textures. So under Bake Mesh Maps, we can find it under Edit, Bake Mesh Maps. I want to bake a material ID but not using material color because I want to get the vertex color out. We're going to use vertex color. So go back to common, gonna find my high definition mesh, tree stump high. The max frontal ray and rear ray is the only thing I usually pay attention to here, and its defaults are pretty decent. So start there. And now let's say bake default. See what it gives us. Great. Okay, so now we've got a mesh with the normals baked onto it. Now we just need to create the color layer. So I'm going to add a fill layer. We'll go into the properties of the fill layer here. It's on the bottom. And look for base color. Where I find my textures under libraries, all the libraries, you go to your project, and then we're going to look at textures. So here you've got color map from mesh value, and that was either your material ID or your vertex colors in this case. So I've got my color map. I'm going to drag that over to base color, plop it in there, and now it exists as my base color. The only thing I have to do now is get some better roughness values in there. So we can just turn the roughness up. That helps. Usually that's all you really need to do for bark, but sometimes you might want to add some shinier spots. Like say if this wood here got varnished for some reason, that would be another layer. So I would create a new layer, and this fill layer works pretty well. And if I go to the properties of the fill layer, I can turn off my color, turn off my height, turn off my metal and normal, but I can leave my roughness on, make it a little shinier, and then in my layer itself, I'll add a black mask so it kind of makes it disappear from everywhere, and then I can paint that shine wherever I want it. So that wooden part could have shine, or even better, we could find an actual wooden material for that area if maybe that is what we're looking for, better material altogether, because that does look kind of hand-drawn, and I wouldn't mind something that looks a little better. But let's see, wood usually doesn't have the spiral pattern, and that's something that we might end up just using kind of a texture that we could find in internet for. So wood, see what rings. So something like this is what I'm looking for. Why don't I use a photograph, and in ZBrush I can bake it, and that way there's ways to project it with a layer and adding a texture that you import in Substance Painter. And I'll get into a lot more materials later on in the semester, but what I want to show is how to add paint to your vertex paint using photos, and there's a really interesting tool for that. You could bring in an alpha or even a texture. Textures work just like alphas, where you can if you've got a brush, generally alphas and textures get all smushed if you're using dot. There's no real specific way they're applied. But if you use drag rectangle, this gives you a very specific place that you're applying a texture. And so you can use whatever texture you want. You can apply it this way. So that's a really easy way to get it on there. And then I want to show some other kind of a little more interesting ways. But first off, let's get a texture that looks good. Something like that. That's pretty awesome. I could very easily just go into ZBrush, find my standard brush, turn drag rectangle on, look for that texture that I just made, and now if I apply the rings here, it will show up here, but it can be a little tricky to get it to align just right, and I think I have cavity masks on here, which I don't want anymore. So one of the things you could do is mask around the area that you want it to be placed, invert the mask, and then turn the intensity up on the color. But here, now I'm applying a photo texture directly to my ZBrush model. What's really awesome about this is I can go back in, and where there are cracks in the photos, I can add them in the model so that they line up as far as the normals and everything. So that's actually a really fun thing about adding textures directly. There's one other cool way of adding textures, which these days, because you've got your texture systems directly in the brush, we don't use it as much. But it was Lightbox was a really interesting tool in which you can kind of project through the model color textures, and sometimes it makes it makes for some interesting effects. So if you go to texture, it's the textures that you have that you're working with, and then there is Lightbox isn't even on until you add a texture to it. So you have to select a texture and say add to Lightbox. Where is it? Or Spotlight. So yeah, right here it says add to Spotlight, and it adds it to this mechanism that you can hold down Alt, move it around. You can rotate it. You can scale it up and down. So it's kind of like it's not necessarily Photoshop, but it is like a way of moving around a layer and then hitting, was it, Lightbox is it? Yes. It's got the tools right here, so texture. So on off is Shift Z. That's what it is. Shift Z turns it on and off. Z gives you the manipulator, and then when you hit Z again, the manipulator goes away. Then you can actually just paint directly through your model. So I'm going to turn off my texture here. Turn on in this brush. I know this might be a little confusing, but basically I'm using a brush just like I would any old day drawing directly on the model. But with Lightbox, if Lightbox is on, like you see this thing here floating in space, if this is on, you can paint through the model onto whatever's behind it, and it does kind of project the texture wherever you want. So I found this really useful for making human face textures, all kinds of things. We don't use it quite as much as we used to, but it is an interesting way to apply texture. But one way or the other, I've got the rings on there already, and now I just need to rebake that texture to Substance Painter. So I'm going to export out this model, Tree Stump High, and we're going to rebake, and it'll bring in the texture. And because in my library and my project and my textures, they all are named this already, it's just going to overwrite these. So I'm pretty sure I don't have to do anything other than bake my mesh maps once more, and it should bring that color directly in. See how it goes then. Cool. Yeah, so now we see the diffuse, texture being baked in there. This is just, I find it a really freeing way to make color onto your model, because we're no longer stuck with separating out the high res and the low res. I'm pretty sure 3D Coat has a way where you can paint directly on the high res, but I find it's just very, very wonderful to have the high res and the low res combined, because then you get to do things like make sure the cracks in the normal map align with the cracks in the texture, and get all that stuff there. But this isn't, it's not like a perfect at this point. So there's all kinds more stuff that we can do to it, adding a little. It just needs to, I don't know, could use some variation of color that was a little hard to get into ZBrush, like maybe just a little more desaturation. No, that's not really helping, is it? Let me try with multiply, and I'm going to turn off in this layer the here's my properties for the layer. There it is. I'm going to turn off in this layer the roughness map. I don't want to change that. I just want to change the color a little bit. sort of bring down the overall color a little bit. And then in Substance Painter, you can paint as well with a paint layer. Instead of a fill layer, we just created add a layer, and you can paint whatever you want. The cool thing is you can also add masks to it so that have generators and actually work very much like the cavity masks here in ZBrush. We can add generators. So say I'm painting some highlights to the bark, but I don't want it in the cracks. Why don't we add a generator? Or first we have to add a mask, and then we could add a generator that is something like dirt or something. Dirt works pretty well. So let me look for my generators. Smart masks. So dirt works pretty well. And then this one has dirt and ground connected, and that might be something that I want. Let's see if that, yeah. So you can see here how it's getting into the cracks, so maybe not as a bright layer, but we could turn this into a multiply and make this, instead of I was painting with white, I could now paint with a darker color with this brush. Properties for the brush are under properties, and we go find the color that I was using. It was too bright, so let's bring it down to a kind of a richer dark color. Now I can kind of paint into the cracks, and it's kind of a cool way of adding a little more extra stuff to your material just by using a generator. I find generators awesome, and the dirt thing works out really well because it makes the lower areas a lot darker, and they would be because of the shadowing tends to have that too. So I'm going to just kind of throw some overall cavity masking here and there where I want it. Then we can lighten it a little bit so it's not quite so heavy-handed. But yeah, it's ways we can just add some texture. The still working out the overall roughness values. Be a little more rough. So I don't want it to feel shiny. But it's kind of bright. Why is that? Is that the fill layer? Is it this layer? It's this layer. So I guess this layer has roughness, and I don't want the roughness in this layer to be shiny. I want it to be rough because it's cracked. So I'm going to turn the roughness up, but I guess since it's a paint layer, it's not really giving me an option to change it. Now, if I paint over it, it fixes it. I just wanted to see if I could adjust it. And again. Yeah, this is the properties of the brush, not necessarily the layer. So, but this is great because if I paint over any areas that are dark and dirt or shadowed, I don't want them to be shiny. Just want them to recede. It's a wonderful way of getting a little more in there. Okay, so we've got photo of application and cavity masking. We've got the vertex ID. And so all of this works out pretty well. The only thing would be why or how do we make it bright colors? For organic objects, it's actually pretty hard to, there's not really a lot of reason to separate the materials unless we're talking about just that one piece of wood. But for the for other objects, like say the ship that I had earlier, one of the things I sometimes do is just take my polygroups and we'll turn my polygroups into vertex paints. And you can do that under polypaint. You can say polypaint from polygroups. So if my polygroups, say on this rock, I wanted maybe one area to be moss. Let's do that. So we've got a separation of material. I'm going to use clay buildup with kind of a little bit more of a noisy alpha, my focal shift softer. and then turn this green with some color, so it's a mossy color. So say this rock has some moss on it, especially up here. We could say that this was a different material. So I painted it a different color. I already did that. Okay, it's fine. But what I could also do is I can take this color that I made and turn it into polygroups. So I say from poly painting, now the polygroups are baked in with the color separation. And the other thing I could do is I can take the poly groups and add it to the color information. So say for some reason I messed up and lost my color information. It's all gray again. This. Now I want to add the poly paint data from the poly groups. And so I go to poly paint and say poly paint from polygroups, and that gives me two very different colors. They are not well, it's kind of similar because they're both green, but they're not there's no color in there anymore. There's no hand-drawn color or anything. So it's a wonderful way to quickly get bright colors into your model. So I've got this rock, it's got some moss on it. I want to bring it into my model, into Substance Painter and everything. This is going pretty well, so I can just export this out or save it and export it out. And I want to export out these textures. And I want to set them up for Arnold. So let's see, output template would be Arnold. Find where I want to go. And then that's good enough. Okay, we'll just export out those textures. Then I want to do this rock. So I'm going to create the low res of the rock. It's incredibly high res now, but very, very quickly I can make a low res by none other than these the Z plugin. So let's get that. The Teams presenter is in the way, so I just want to go to here where Z plugin. And what was it? Decimation master. That works really well for reducing rocks. So I can make this rock and do a 1K rock. See what it looks like. Oh, but before I do, I need to make sure that I have exported or duplicated the high res, so we're not missing the high res. We can export this too. So I'll export the high res first. So under Tool, Export, OBJ. Put that in my tree stump spot. Rock high. And then I want to go to the other one, and we will go to my Z plugin, decimation master. We're going to go down to 1,000 polys. That looks pretty good. You'll notice, like a lot of details go away, especially around the moss, but that's fine. That looks pretty good. The cracks remain. That's great. That's awesome about Decimation Master. This doesn't work for characters or anything like that, but it works really well for rocks and more mechanical things. And then I just need to unwrap the UVs on this one. So Z plugin. This rock is really simple, so I don't really think I need to break up the UV shells with polygroups or anything, but I can just turn off polygroups, say unwrap, and then I'll export this as rock low. All right, let's go into Substance Painter. And ideally, we'd probably want to have these two together. And I could have done that in Maya, but since we're already here and already did those textures, we'll do them separately. So we got rock low, bring that in. Now I've got to bake the mesh maps, and I am going to want to grab my material ID color from Vertex Colors. So we'll use vertex color rather than material color. That's if you're coming from Maya, sometimes you can use material color, but it only seems to work with 3 different materials. So generally it's not very useful. But vertex color rather than material color. Everything else stays the same. Change my output size to 2048 and then rock high. And now when I bake, we should get my normal map and my material ID map. Now at this point, I wasn't actually thinking of my material ID as being color. It's actually going to use it as a material ID system. So what I want to do now is just add materials. So let's find some rocks. I never really looked at the rocks. I don't know if there's any simple rocks. I bet there's something. Granite or marble. Marble isn't exactly what I'm looking for, but no, not that marble. Sometimes the marble's okay. That's pretty good. It just the color sucks, so I would change that beige color to a more gray or blue gray. No, that's not it. Gotta find the color that's giving me that beige. There it is. Base color. Base color's got a bunch of things in it. Okay, but I think that's the base color here. Yep. It almost looks cool if I just take it out all together. But I bet I could change the base color to be less beige, more kind of granite. Don't take it for granite. It's really popping out those edges. Sometimes that's fun, but it's a lot. This is what's cool about the generators and the auto masking is that it does give you some things like that. Those popped edges can be really fun, and you can bake that out and paint over it too. So it's really shiny. Don't like how shiny it is. So let's go to my roughness values and see if I can bring those down. Nope, that is giving it that shine. Well, let's see. Can always add a layer over this to kill the roughness. Yeah, the roughness refine, that's what it is. I'll just delete that layer, don't need it. The colored edges, that's what's giving me that popped edges, which can be fun, but it's kind of the wrong color, a little too bright. So we'll bring down the colors to be a little more blue. This would be the case of when you're dry brushing, you don't want to use just white. You want to add a little bit of color to the dry brush edges, give them a little more pop. That's fun. It's giving it a nice, fun edging. Obviously, a little too much detail if we're trying to do something stylized, but I'm not, so I'm okay with that. I'm going to go back to my base color. It's a little too saturated. That's getting me what I want. Okay. That gave me the rock part, but I also need the moss part, and I don't want the moss and the rock interacting, so I'm going to add a mask with color selection. And if we go to properties and pick color, I'm going to pick the rock side and leave the moss alone. And I believe I have in my library a moss material that I just downloaded, so I wouldn't say it made this one, but it was a freebie that was available. So let's see, my assets, and then I'm going to go to materials. Oh, and yeah, here we go. So I've got some moss materials that work out okay. It's just like using any substance painter material. This one was just downloaded. So does that look okay? Not that greatest. What about this one? No. This one will work, Oh yeah, I also have some other older rock materials. This one will work, I just got to play with it a little bit. First off, let's add mask with color collection. Color selection and pick the moss color. So now I've got moss up here, rock down there. The only problem is there's sometimes a little bit of an ugly edge there, and that can be frustrating. Sometimes moss has that. It's just there's a shine to it. I really don't like how it does that. But in properties, you can play with the tolerances, and that can sometimes get rid of the shine or that awkward change. Maybe the hardness, just the hardness, just the tolerance. It's not really fixing it though. It's just making it worse. So let's see. Try to pick the color again, and then you can add another color. You can add multiple colors, and so maybe that one little transitionary color. It's not. That's making it worse. This point, I know I set up the whole material ID thing, but I would go as far to say that with organic stuff, the material ID thing doesn't work that well, and it's almost better to just do it by hand. But maybe I can just do another layer, or no, let's see. How does this work? I can group the whole thing and get rid of this mask. And then in the group, I will add the mask with color selection. Actually, it looks good if I push the tolerance up. Looks a little better. And let's see, is there any way? This is one of those areas where I probably add a whole nother layer and make it a pass-through layer, which is in the tool here. If you make it a pass-through, you can use it for rubber stamping, and this might be an area to rubber stamp. But before I fix the edges in between these two, I want to fix this moss, make it look a little more believable. So I'm going to go to my moss layer, go to my properties of my moss, and maybe play around with some of the scale to it. It sometimes fixes some things. There's a number of channels going on in the moss. The normals are really strong. The roughness value should be high, so it shouldn't be too shiny. But there, I'm getting a little better. The colors are also too bright. They feel very lime, and I tend to believe in maybe a little richer green works better. Like that, and then the overall rock texture, the colors, maybe it doesn't feel too believable, but I do have some good rock materials that we can try to apply here. In that layer or that layer. Let's try this on the top. There we go. Yeah, it's got some rocky stuff going on. And then I can add mask with color selection. Pick this color. So now I've got two different rocks. I kind of could choose them, or I could mask it out a little more. I'm just going to bring down the intensity on one so that I still have a little bit of the one underneath. This is not the prettiest rock, but so at this point, I'm like, I don't really like the color selection gradient. So I might add one more. I can just duplicate this layer, and then this one I'll get rid of I'll add a black mask, and then I'll just make sure that the then I'll add white. So let's see, make sure that it's white. Okay. So if I add white, it should be showing up. It's just, I guess this rock is overwriting it all. So if I put it under, it won't overwrite. Place the rock, the moss on the top of everything, and now I can just kind of add a little transitionary moss where it needs. I could even use a brush that perhaps has a little better kind of edges and stuff. So just doing this, get a little better edging to that moss. It's not quite so simple. And then I could export this out and bring it all into Maya and render it. I can see it kind of looks like a seam there. That's not too bad though. Yeah, I'd export this as my rock textures. Why don't I name my texture set setting? Sorry, the texture set list. I can rename this from default to rock, and that way when I export the textures, the texture set list defines the name of the textures starting with rock. Export my textures. And this should work. I just bring it into Maya. Look for my rock low. That works fine. I do need to smooth the edges, so modeling, mesh display, soften edge, and then the tree as well. Let's bring that tree in. Tree stump low. Cool, there it is, and I will do the same thing, mesh display, soften edge, and now they just need their materials, so apply, assign new material, Arnold, and standard surface. Go find my color. We look for tree stump base color. And got really dark, but okay. And then the rest. This is the typical AI standard application where metalness we would apply next, but since it's not there's no metallic in it, I'm just going to leave the metalness map off and keep it at 0. The specular roughness, that's something we could also apply, but since it is pretty consistent, I'm just going to keep it up high. And then the normal map. So geometry, bump mapping, file, we change it to tangent space normal, go find our tree stump default normal, make sure it's set to sRGB, or set from sRGB color space to raw, and then usually the Arnold, we turn off the flip channels, but generally we have to double check that. It's frustrating. Each rendering engine, whether it's Unreal, Marmoset, Arnold, or any engine, is going to need you to check your normals. The algorithms change so often that it's always a good idea to check your normals on any pipeline so that you're not having backwards normals or the green channels inverted. Just in case this crashes on me, I'm also going to fix my Arnold render so that it doesn't crash on me as much. System turning my auto detect threads to something like 6. At least 24 threads in my processor. It always seems to help it from not crashing. So now when I hit the render button, hopefully don't crash. very bright. It got so dark. Why did it get so dark? I'm going to just double check the actual PNG, see if it is base color. It's not that dark, so it shouldn't be that dark. Let me just double check my material, figure out why it got so dark. The lighting needs to go up a little bit. Okay, this looks fine. But here's where you tell the normal map if it's working correctly. If the cracks look like cracks, with the light facing the right way, we're in good, and it looks like it is. So this is the case with no matter what rendering engine you're working in. I always need to check my normals before I move on. And then yeah, everything else looks fine. Then we have the rock material. I'm going to assign that. That's going to have a few more options to it. AI standard surface. Grab my color. Rock base color. Showing up. Yeah, so it's there. And then we're going to add, I'll skip the metalness, but I'm going to add the roughness. And just remember, metalness and roughness, when you bring in the texture, you have to do two things. You have to turn off color space from being sRGB and turn it into raw. And then under color balance, alpha is luminance. So those things need to be checked. And then we can go back to adding my normal map here. Okay, rock normal, set sRGB to raw, then go, and I believe the pipeline seemed to work where I didn't flip the red channel and the green channel. And also we need to make sure that's tangent space normals. Now I should have two material sets that are working here. Save it. Yeah, they're not matching color-wise, that's for sure, because I didn't make them in the same place, and that is you know, a good reason to make, you know, if you've got something that's this combined, it definitely is a good idea to see them together because they don't look quite right together at the moment. Being made separately, the colors just are a little too obviously different. But that would be another reason to create them all in ZBrush. And but yeah, the whole system works for baking them down. At this point, in order to combine them, I could try to adjust these colors, but it's almost easier to do them as a single unit. And there's a cool thing you can do if you're so inclined, if you're wanting to reuse the textures that you've already made from Substance Painter or from some sort of other export, and you want to apply them as color textures in Substance Painter, you can do that. So I'm going to show how to do that. So these tree and rock, I'm going to create a new Substance Painter file altogether. We're going to not do any baking, but we're going to take the baked textures that I'd already made and combine them together so I can maybe adjust their colors while I'm looking at them. So tree rock, that's going to have two different materials on it. We've got AI standard surface and AI standard surface 2. I'll just rename this to tree, this one to rock. Then now, what I'll do is I'll create a layer. We're going to import all of the textures that I've baked. So let's see, let's view this so you can understand what's what here. Details, type, and now we're going to take all my PNGs and import it into my texture library. So let's bring up textures, put them in here, drag all of my materials, why not, just grab them all, pop them in here. It's going to ask where I want them. I'm going to say texture, 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 texture. So they don't, so I know where to find them later. And then the other thing is import recess to current session. So import, they're all here. Now I've got my fill layer. This is my tree. I go to my properties, my fill layer. I can apply the base color. I can apply the normal map. And then if I wanted to, I could apply, I think there's a roughness map and some other things. See, this is come in with their names, did they? Oh, height. This one is, that's ambient occlusion or something. That's roughness. Okay, pop that into roughness. Then for the rock, grab the rock, create a fill layer, and go to the properties of the fill layer, and we're going to apply the base color and the normal map. And just the reason why I want to do this is so I could see them both in the same place. And now I can do some things in the layers to adjust the color a little better. So overall, this was a little too gray. This is a little too brown. So what if I added some gray dust feel to the tree just with a brush? So let's see, where's my brushes? Okay, so yeah, artistic hairy brush. So what I want to do is just kind of get a color that's just a little gray, dark gray. I want my roughness value to be high on this as well. Waking up, Nebula. And then now I can just kind of dust it, basically. I'm going to bring down the intensity of this brush. Where is it? This brush flow I want to bring down. And then I'm just trying to match up the colors a little bit. I think I've got a little brown. So let's get more of a gray. There's all kinds of ways I could maybe approach this a little better, but it's a little too heavy-handed. So use an eraser to erase this. There it is. Are you ready to play now? Okay. Anyway, I'm just trying to add a little more flavor so there's some connection. And yeah, let's get my pen out so I can get this a little softer. And then I can even add some a generator mask over this, so there's some blending as well. So I'm gonna add a mask, and then we'll add a generator to the mask, and then we'll plug in that dirt generator. That seems to work pretty well. So that's under smart masks. Dirt leak dry. Let me try that. This just kind of makes it so on my layer isn't too heavy-handed. I can play around with it a little more, and then there's going to be some matching. It's with the green moss. It definitely seems like I should add some moss to the tree itself, and so that's maybe not a bad idea. We go to materials. See my assets. Yeah, I've got that moss here. I could add it. Kind of overwrites everything, but I'll add a black mask, and then that way I can kind of blend it up. And this is what I was talking about, is it just needs some sort of connection. And then overall, the color of this rock I'm not very happy with. It's a little too bright. So changes to colors, all of it takes a little bit of energy and time, but this is the kind of stuff that makes the work stand out a lot better if we are not just going with what is given to us, but making sure that we tune everything as much as we can. So yeah, the rock that we have here, we no longer have the material changes because I kind of overrode all that, but I could make a paint layer and just give it some dark grime to it. Grime being black and having high roughness. That super black, but if I come at it real lightly, we can just give it a little bit of a shadow where it needs it, and then maybe all of this could have a mask on it as well. Some of this. Turn my flow way down, or my opacity. But since it's on a separate layer, there's all kinds of stuff I could do very carefully. Okay, so I think we're coming up to the end of class. Just want to add a generator to this gray mask. Edges scratch, that's pretty cool. You can see I'm playing with the blending, not quite there yet, but it is it's better than what it was, and then it's just, yeah, it takes time to kind of massage it all together. All right, since it is the end of class, just want to double check, make sure anybody has any questions or anything they want to talk about before we go.
No questions here.
Cool. All right. Yeah. If there's anything else that you're thinking about in the future that we want to talk about for the next classes, anything that you're not sure how to handle, you think about along the week, we'll go from there. Yeah, just hit me up on anything. Some ugly masks on the back, but anyway, obviously this works, but I just want to point out that artistically it's not there yet, and that does take some time. So just get rid of some of this. But come on, cat. But we get the technical aspects of how all of that works, getting the materials out of Maya or out of ZBrush, and then yeah, let's move on. We'll find more fun things to talk about next week. Let's see. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and try to stop my cat from eating everything. What are you doing? Stop it! Stop it! No! Hey, my important documents. All right, well, it was great to see everybody. If you have any questions along the week, let me know. And we'll meet up next week. For next week, I'm definitely looking for kind of, we're getting close to the final pass of the high res, so I do want to see kind of most things touched, but I understand that if not everything is done. But it's like we should have everything kind of blocked in by now. That would be important. All right, have a wonderful evening. I'll see you next week. Hit me up on Teams if you have any questions. Nebula will help you answer them in the order she receives them. And I will also. So cheers, everybody. Have a wonderful evening and a good week.